need to say up front that I still don't know what happened that night. I've told this story maybe 5 times to close friends, and every time I get to the part about the truck, somebody asks a question I can't answer. I'm not going to pretend I have it all figured out. I'm just going to tell you what happened in order, the way I remember it. My name's not important, but I'll tell you the basics because they matter for the story. I was 26 at the time, working as a pharmaceutical rep, which meant I spent a stupid amount of time driving between clinics in the Texas Panhandle and eastern New Mexico. This was October of 2024. I drove a white 2019 Ford Escape with about 90,000 miles on it, and I knew Interstate 40 between Amarillo and Tucumcari better than I knew the block I grew up on. I want to describe that stretch of road because it matters. If you've never driven I-40 through that part of the country, it's flat in a way that messes with your head. You can see a water tower or a grain elevator from 15 miles out and watch it get slowly bigger for 20 minutes. At night, especially outside of Amarillo, the darkness is total. No ambient light. No glow on the horizon. Just your headlights and whatever the moon's doing. And sometimes not even that. I'd left a clinic at PM after a meeting ran long, which was later than I liked to be on the road, but I had an early appointment in Tucumcari the next morning and figured I'd rather drive it that night and sleep in than wake up at 5 a.m. I texted my boyfriend at the time, Danny, something like, "Leaving now, should be at the hotel by 11:30 or probably asleep alo lovu," and pulled onto the interstate. For the first hour, nothing. Truckers passing, a couple of RVs, the normal stuff. I had a podcast going, something true crime. I don't even remember which one. I stopped once at a gas station in Vega for coffee because I could feel myself getting tired. The kind of tired where your eyes start doing that thing where they don't quite focus right. The gas station attendant was this older guy, maybe 60, and he made a comment that I didn't think much of at the time. He said, "Long night to be out here alone." I said something like, "Yeah, work." And he nodded and said, "Careful out past Glen Rio. Road gets weird out there." I laughed a little, because it sounded like the kind of thing people say to make small talk, and I got back in my car. I want to be honest that I didn't think about that comment again until much later. Around 11 p.m., maybe 11:05, I crossed into New Mexico. There's a rest area not far past the state line, before you get into Tucumcari proper, off exit 369 near San Jon. I don't usually stop at rest areas that late by myself, but I was starting to feel that heavy-eyed thing again, the kind where you catch yourself drifting a half second before you correct, and I decided I'd rather lose 10 minutes than risk it. I pulled in. The lot was almost empty. There was a single semi-truck parked at the far end, engine off, no lights that I could see inside the cab. There was one other car, a sedan, parked near the restroom building, but no one was around it. The lighting in that rest area is that sodium orange color, the kind that makes everything look sick, and there were maybe 2 working lamps out of what should have been. I remember thinking the place felt more run down than the last time I'd stopped there, months earlier. I parked under one of the working lights, close to the restroom building, because that's just what you do. Habit. I sat there for a second, finishing my coffee, and that's when I noticed the truck's headlights were on. Not the cab lights. The headlights. Pointed at nothing, just out toward the dark field past the parking lot. I hadn't noticed them come on. I don't know if they'd been on the whole time and I just hadn't clocked it walking up, or if they'd switched on while I was sitting there. I want to be clear that a truck with its headlights on in a rest stop isn't inherently strange. Truckers idle their engines for the AC. They run their lights for all kinds of reasons. I told myself that. I got out of my car. The air was cold, low 50s, and there was that dry smell you get out on the plains at night. Dust and diesel, and something like sagebrush. My footsteps on the pavement were the only sound besides a very faint hum from the truck. I walked into the restroom building. The lights inside buzzed, that fluorescent flicker hum, and one of the 4 overhead panels was completely dead, leaving a section by the sinks in near darkness. I used the bathroom, washed my hands, didn't look too long in the mirror because those lights make everyone look terrible, and headed back out. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing next to my car, not near it. Next to it, close enough that his hand was resting on the hood. He was maybe in his 40s, hard to say exactly. Average height, thin in a way that seemed less like fitness and more like he didn't eat regularly. He was wearing a flannel over a white t-shirt and jeans that looked stiff, like new jeans that hadn't been washed yet, which struck me as odd even in the moment, though I couldn't tell you why it stood out. He had a ball cap on, pulled low, and I couldn't see his eyes clearly under the orange light. I stopped walking, not dramatically. I just sort of slowed down, the way you do when you're recalculating a situation. Evening, he said. His voice was quieter than I expected, almost gentle. Hey, I said, and I started walking again, angling to go around him to get to my driver's side door. Long drive? He said. Yeah, heading to Tucumcari, I said, which in hindsight I regret saying, but you don't think about that stuff in the moment. You're just trying to seem rude, because some part of your brain is still more scared of being seen as paranoid than it is of the actual person in front of you. Tucumcari's a good... You should let that coffee kick in first. And he smiled, and it wasn't a bad smile exactly, but it didn't reach his eyes, or maybe I just couldn't see his eyes well enough to know. I got to my door. He hadn't moved from the hood. I'm going to get going, I said, and I unlocked the car with my thumb on the fob in my pocket, and I heard the chirp, and I felt a version of relief just from that sound. You be safe, he said. Road's not always what it looks like out here. I got in, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine. I watched him in my peripheral vision the whole time. He didn't walk away right when I got in. He stood there for maybe 5-6 seconds, just looking at the car, and then he turned and walked, unhurried, toward the semi-truck at the end of the lot. I pulled out of that rest stop faster than I probably should have. For the first few minutes back on the interstate, I was running on adrenaline, gripping the wheel, checking my mirrors more than usual. I called Danny. It went to voicemail because it was almost midnight and he was asleep like I figured. I didn't leave a message. I just needed to hear a ring, I think, some proof that the world outside my car still existed normally. About 15 minutes later, I saw headlights come up behind me. Far back at first, then closing distance steadily. I told myself it was nothing. Truckers drive faster than the speed limit out there all the time. Everybody knows that. But something about the way these particular lights were positioned bothered me. They were high up, definitely a semi, and they weren't wavering the way most trucks do a little on that road, that slow left-right drift as the driver corrects. These were dead steady, like cruise control locked in. I sped up. The lights behind me sped up. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds, and I know there are perfectly rational things that could explain a truck matching your speed on an empty interstate at midnight. But when it's happening to you, in the dark, on a road with no exits for miles, rational explanations don't feel like enough. I slowed down, thinking maybe I'd let it pass, get a look at it, confirm it was nothing. The truck slowed down exactly the same distance back, maybe 4 car lengths, for a solid 2 minutes while I held steady at 60. Then it flashed its high beams, once. A long pulse that filled my whole car with light and made my rearview mirror useless, blinding for a few seconds. I don't know exactly why, but that was the moment I stopped telling myself it was nothing. There's an exit for Glen Rio a while after San Jon, right on the Texas-New Mexico border, and I want to mention that Glen Rio is basically a ghost town now. It's been abandoned for decades, old Route 66 buildings standing empty, no gas, no lights, nothing. I remembered the gas station attendant's comment, "Careful out past Glen Rio." I hadn't even registered it as a real warning at the time. Now it felt like the only piece of useful information I had. I did not take that exit. Every instinct told me not to leave the interstate, not to put myself somewhere more isolated than I already was. I kept my speed at 65, then 70, watching the lights behind me. They stayed exactly matched. At some point, I don't know exactly when, maybe 20 minutes after leaving the rest stop, I saw a second set of headlights ahead of me, far in the distance, coming the opposite direction. As they got closer, it was a highway patrol car. I don't know if I've ever felt relief like that before or since. I flashed my own lights at it, several times, hazard blink style, hoping it would register as a signal. The trooper's car didn't slow down. It passed me going the other way and kept going, but something happened right after. The semi behind me, which had been locked to my speed for almost half an hour, dropped back, not all at once. Gradually, like the driver had simply lifted off the gas. Within a couple minutes, its lights were far enough back that I couldn't tell anymore if it was still following, or if it had just been a truck driving the same road at the same speed the whole time, which is, I remind myself, actually a completely mundane possibility. I made it to Tucumcari around 12:40 a.m., roughly an hour later than I told Danny. I checked into the motel 6 off Route 66, the one with the pool that's usually drained in October, and I remember sitting in the parking lot for a full minute before going inside, just watching the road to see if the truck would pass by. It didn't. Or if it did, I didn't see it, or didn't recognize it, because at that point, every semi looked identical to me. I told him over the phone. He was concerned, but also gently suggested, in the way boyfriends do when they're trying not to sound dismissive, that truckers on those roads are just aggressive drivers sometimes, that the guy at the rest stop was probably just a lonely trucker making conversation, awkward but harmless. I wanted to believe that. I still sort of do, most days. Here's the detail that bothers me, the one I never got an answer for. When I checked into the motel that night, the front desk clerk, a woman named Carol according to her name tag, asked if I'd had a good drive. I mentioned, half joking to diffuse my own nerves, that a trucker had followed me pretty closely from the rest stop near San Jon. She didn't laugh it off the way I expected. She got quiet for a second and said, "Which rest stop? The one past Vega or the one closer to San Jon proper?" I told her San Jon. She nodded slowly and said, "That one's had some calls about it. Nothing ever comes of them, though." And then she just handed me my key and moved on to the next thing, like she'd said too much and wanted to close the subject. I asked her what kind of calls. She said she wasn't sure, something she'd heard from other guests over the years, people saying they felt watched there. One woman who said a man matched her speed on the highway after stopping there, almost the same story as mine down to the flannel shirt. Carol seemed uncomfortable talking about it, and I didn't push. I did the drive back through that stretch of I-40 2 days later in broad daylight, appointment finished, heading home. I made a point of pulling into that same rest stop, partly to prove to myself there was nothing to it. In daylight, it looked exactly like what it was. A sun-bleached, underfunded rest area with cracked pavement and a couple of picnic tables nobody used. Completely unremarkable. There was no truck. There was nothing. But I noticed something I think about more than anything else from that night. There's a metal sign near the entrance to the rest stop, the kind with faded lettering listing the distance to the next services. Someone had scratched something into the metal, low down near the post, small enough that you'd only see it if you were looking right at it. It just said, "Don't stop after dark." No name, no date, nothing else. Just that. I don't know who wrote it or when. I don't know if it was a joke or graffiti from a bored teenager or something else. I think about it more than I think about the man in the flannel shirt, honestly, because at least he could be explained away. A weird guy. A coincidence with the truck. A lonely trucker on a long haul who happened to be going my speed for a while. All of that fits into a normal world. But somebody scratched a warning into that sign. And I don't stay dark anymore. Not on that stretch of road. Not anywhere, really. I drive an extra 20 minutes if I have to. Find a gas station instead. Somewhere with more light and more people. Even if it's more expensive or less convenient. Danny and I aren't together anymore. For reasons that have nothing to do with this story. But I still think about that night sometimes when I'm driving alone at night on empty roads. I've never told anyone besides him and a couple close friends, mostly because I don't know how to end the story in a way that feels satisfying, and I think that's part of what bothers me most. There's no resolution. Nobody was arrested. Nothing was ever confirmed. I don't even know if the man at the rest stop and the truck that followed me were connected at all, or if my brain just built a narrative out of two separate, unrelated, mundane things because I was tired and scared and alone on a dark highway. I just know that somewhere out past San Jon, New Mexico, there's a rest stop with 2 working lights out of 7 and a sign with 4 scratched words on it, and I have never gone back after dark, and I don't intend to. Story 2. The man behind the wheel. I've gone back and forth for a long time about whether to write this one down. Not because I'm worried about being believed. Honestly, I don't care that much either way, but because writing it down makes it feel real again, in a way I usually try to avoid. I'm going to keep this as close to what actually happened as I can remember, including the parts I still don't understand. This happened in February of 2025. I was 29, living in Flagstaff, Arizona, working night shifts as an ER tech at Flagstaff Medical Center, which if you don't know the area sits right off Route 66 near downtown. My schedule at the time was 3 12-hour shifts a week, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I'd usually drive home exhausted somewhere around 7:20, 7:30 in the morning, sun barely up, roads mostly empty because Flagstaff doesn't really get moving until closer to 8. My apartment was about 25 minutes out, off Highway 89 heading north toward the Sunnyside area, and most of that drive is through a stretch of ponderosa pine forest that's genuinely beautiful in daylight, but can feel very isolating, especially in winter when there's still snow banked up on the shoulders and almost no other cars. I need to give some backstory because it matters for what happened later. About 6 weeks before the incident I'm going to describe, I noticed a car in the hospital parking garage a few times that stuck with me, not because anything happened, just because it was distinctive. A dark green, older model Jeep Grand Cherokee, the boxy kind from the late 90s, with a cracked driver's side mirror, held together with what looked like electrical tape. I noted once on the same level, and because it had a faded parking permit sticker from a different hospital system entirely, one in Prescott, which struck me as odd for a car regularly parked in Flagstaff. I didn't think much of it. Cars come from other towns, people transfer, whatever. I want to be honest that at the time it registered as nothing more than a passing observation, the kind of thing you notice and immediately forget. The night everything happened, I'd worked a rough shift. We'd had a bad car accident come in around 3 a.m., a rollover on I-40, and it had been a long, heavy night in the way ER nights sometimes are, where you're running on adrenaline and caffeine, and you don't process how tired you are until you're finally sitting still. I clocked out a few minutes after 7, said bye to my coworker Renata in the break room, and walked out to the garage. The green Jeep was parked 2 spots down from my car. I remember that specifically because I had to be careful backing out, since whoever parked it had pulled in crooked and was close to my bumper. I got on 89 heading north around 7:15. Traffic was light, just a couple of cars, normal for that hour. The sky was doing that pale gray pre-dawn thing, not quite light yet, with the pines on either side of the road still holding shadow. I had the heat on, I remember, because it was maybe 28 degrees out, and I had a granola bar sitting in my cup holder that I hadn't eaten yet. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights behind me. Nothing unusual in itself, but I clocked, almost unconsciously, that they were the same headlight shape and height as the Jeep from the garage, the kind of high, slightly uneven headlights older SUVs have. I told myself that was a stretch, that lots of cars have similar headlights, and mostly forgot about it. The road curves a fair amount through that stretch, past Fort Valley, and there aren't many places to pull off. At one point, I slowed for a curve and glanced in my mirror, and the car behind me was close enough that I could see it clearly for the first time. It was the green Jeep, cracked mirror and all. I felt a small, cold drop in my stomach, the kind you get when something registers as wrong before your brain has fully explained why. I told myself again that it was a coworker, that plenty of hospital staff live out this direction, that there was nothing strange about someone driving the same route home at the same time I did. I kept my speed steady. The Jeep stayed about 3 car lengths back, which is a normal following distance, nothing aggressive about it. Then it got closer. Not dramatically, it didn't speed up and tailgate me. It just, over the course of maybe 2 minutes, closed the gap slowly and steadily until it was close enough that I couldn't see its headlights in my rearview mirror anymore, just the grille and the top of the windshield filling the mirror. I want to describe what I could see of the driver, because this is the part that still gets to me. Through my rearview in that dim early light, I could make out a shape behind the wheel, but something about the posture was wrong. Most drivers sit with some amount of movement, small adjustments, a hand coming off the wheel to adjust the radio or scratch their face. This person was completely still. Hands at what I guessed was 10 and 2, head level, not moving at all, like a mannequin propped in the seat. I sped up. The Jeep matched me. At this point, despite the cold, I remember reaching over without looking and grabbing my phone from the passenger seat, trying to unlock it one-handed to call someone, anyone, while still watching the road. I fumbled it, and it dropped into the footwell, and I made the decision not to look down for it, because taking my eyes off a curving mountain road with a car riding my bumper felt like a worse risk. There's a long straightaway before the road curves toward the Sunnyside turnoff, and on that straightaway, the Jeep pulled out into the oncoming lane, which was empty at that hour, and came up alongside me. I glanced over. I couldn't help it. The driver was a man, I'd guess somewhere in his 50s, though it was hard to be sure in that light. He had gray, closely cropped hair, and he was wearing what looked like a dark canvas jacket. His face wasn't twisted into anything dramatic, no snarl, no obvious aggression. He was just looking straight ahead at the road, not at me, hands still fixed, expression completely blank, like he was watching television rather than driving a vehicle. He held that position, running parallel to me at maybe 55 miles an hour, for what felt like a very long time, but was probably only 4 or 5 seconds. Then, without turning his head, without any change in expression, he jerked the wheel toward me, not fully into my lane. It was more like a feint, a sudden 6-inch lurch in my direction that made me flinch and swerve toward the shoulder, my tires catching gravel and snow slush at the edge of the road. I remember the exact sound, a kind of grinding crunch under my tires, and the car shuddering as I fought to keep it straight. I did not go off the road, but it was close enough that my heart was slamming and my vision had that tunnel-narrow quality that happens when adrenaline floods you all at once. When I got the car back under control and looked over again, the Jeep had already pulled back into its own lane, dropping behind me, matching my speed again, like nothing had happened. I did the only thing I could think to do, which was take the next turn hard, without signaling, onto a side road I knew led toward a gas station near the edge of Sunnyside. I don't know if that was... In hindsight, pulling off the main road into a smaller, quieter side street could have been the wrong move if he'd followed. But I wasn't thinking strategically. I was thinking about getting somewhere with people in it. The Jeep did not... It continued straight on 89. I sat in the gas station parking lot for probably 10 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car. My hands were shaking too hard to text at first. When I finally did, I called Renata instead of texting because I needed to hear her voice. She picked up groggy, since she'd only just gotten home herself, and I told her what happened. She was quiet for a second, and then said something that I've never forgotten. "Wait, was it the green Jeep with the taped mirror?" I said yes, and asked how she knew, and she said, "That thing's been parked in that garage for like 2 months. I asked security about it once, because nobody I know drives it, and they said it doesn't belong to any employee on record. They think somebody's been leaving it there and coming back for it, but nobody's ever caught who." That detail bothered me more than almost anything else about the whole event, more than the swerve, more than the man's blank expression. A car that had been sitting in a hospital garage for 2 months, that didn't belong to any employee, being driven around at 7 a.m. by someone who then ran another car off the road, for no reason I could identify, with no attempt to actually cause a collision, no attempt to stop me, nothing that looked like it was building toward an actual crime. Just that one lurch, and then nothing. I reported it to Flagstaff police that same morning. I gave a description of the vehicle, the partial read I'd gotten on the plate, which was a New Mexico plate, oddly, not Arizona, and a description of the driver as best I could manage. An officer took the report politely, but I could tell, in the way officers sometimes get, that without a collision or an injury, this was going to sit fairly low on a list of priorities. I don't blame him for that. I understand how these things work. I checked the hospital garage for the next several shifts. The green Jeep never reappeared. I asked hospital security directly, and the guard I spoke to, a man named Oswaldo, who'd worked there for over a decade, told me he remembered the vehicle vaguely, said it had been towed a few weeks after my incident because it sat unmoved for too long without a valid permit, some administrative process, standard stuff. I asked if they'd found anything out about who it belonged to. He said the tow company reported the VIN came back to an owner who'd reported the vehicle stolen almost a year prior, out of Grants, New Mexico, but that the case had gone nowhere, and the vehicle had never been recovered until it turned up abandoned, apparently, in a hospital garage 200 miles from where it was stolen. Nobody was ever identified. Nobody was ever charged with anything because there was technically no crime committed against me that could be proven. No contact, no injury, just a police report describing a swerve on an empty road at dawn. I changed my route, which added about 10 minutes to my commute, taking a longer way that stays closer to town for most of the drive, instead of cutting straight through the forest stretch. I also started parking on a different level of the garage, closer to the elevator, even though it meant walking further to get there some nights, because I couldn't shake the feeling of being near where that Jeep used to sit. The thing that still bothers me, the detail I never got an answer to, has nothing to do with the driver or the Jeep itself. It's the plate, a New Mexico plate, reported stolen out of Grants, on a vehicle that had apparently been sitting quietly in an Arizona hospital garage for months before that morning, driven by someone whose face I saw clearly enough to describe in detail to police, and who has never, as far as I know, been identified. I've looked, periodically, at local news out of Flagstaff and Grants both, for anything that might connect to that man or that vehicle. I've never found anything. I still work night shifts. I still drive that road sometimes, though less often than I used to. And every time I do, somewhere around the curve past Fort Valley, I find myself checking my mirror a beat longer than I need to, watching for a shape that never comes back. Story 3. Mile marker 47. I drive for a living, or I did for about 4 years, and in that time, I picked up a lot of stories from other drivers. The kind of thing you swap over the CB or in a truck stop booth at 2 a.m. when nobody's in a hurry to sleep. Most of them were nothing, exaggerated, secondhand, the kind of story that's changed shape by the time it reaches you. This one isn't secondhand. This one is mine, and I still don't fully understand it, and I think that's the most honest way I can start. I was 31 at the time, October of 2023. Driving a box truck for a regional delivery company, doing overnight runs between Knoxville, Tennessee, and Asheville, North Carolina, mostly along I-40 through the Pigeon River Gorge, which if you've never driven it, is one of the more dramatic stretches of interstate in the country. Steep mountain sides, the river running right alongside the road in places, and long sections with no cell service and almost no lighting once you're past the last exit before the state line. My route that night had me leaving the Knoxville Distribution Center around 11 p.m., running a load of auto parts to a facility outside Asheville, expected arrival around 1:30 a.m. This was a route I'd done probably 60 times by that point. I knew every curve, every runaway truck ramp, every spot where deer tended to cross. I wasn't nervous about the drive itself. I want to be clear about that because what happened wasn't about unfamiliarity with the road. It was about something on the road that didn't belong there. I left on schedule, Radio on low, a classic rock station out of Knoxville that started to fade into static somewhere past Newport. I remember what I was wearing, only because I still have the jacket. A gray Carhartt with a coffee stain on the left cuff that never came out. I had a thermos of time Melissa had made me before I left, and I remember being annoyed she'd put too much sugar in it, the kind of small, mundane detail you don't expect to remember years later but somehow do. Around mile marker 55, still well within Tennessee, traffic thinned out to almost nothing, which is normal for that hour on that stretch. I passed one southbound tanker truck heading the opposite direction, its running lights the only thing visible in the dark for a long stretch of curves. After that, no cars ahead of me, none behind, just my headlights carving out maybe 200 feet of asphalt and guardrail and dark tree line at a time. At mile marker 49, I saw someone standing on the shoulder. I want to describe this carefully because the details matter. It wasn't near an exit. There's no reason for a pedestrian to be on foot on that stretch of I-40, not near a rest area, not near any access point I was aware of. Just a stretch of narrow shoulder between the travel lane and a guardrail, with the mountainside dropping steeply on the other side toward the river. The person was standing facing the road, not walking, not waving for help, just standing still, facing my headlights as I approached. I remember slowing down instinctively, that automatic reaction you get when you see someone on foot near traffic, and as I got closer, I could make out that it was a woman, maybe mid-30s, wearing what looked like a light-colored dress, which struck me immediately as wrong for the weather. It was low 40s that night, and she had no jacket, no visible bag, nothing that suggested she'd broken down or been walking any real distance. I slowed further, thinking I'd stop, ask if she needed help, standard trucker instinct when you see someone stranded on a highway at night. But something about her stillness made me hesitate. She wasn't looking at my truck the way a stranded person looks at an approaching vehicle with that hopeful, urgent attention. She was just watching, arms at her sides, head level, and as I got within maybe 100 feet, close enough for my headlights to fully illuminate her, she turned her head and looked directly at my windshield. I did not stop. I want to be honest that I regret not stopping, in the sense that if she genuinely needed help, I left someone in a bad situation. But everything about that moment felt wrong, in a way I can't fully articulate. The kind of wrong your body registers before your brain catches up. And I kept driving. In my side mirror, as I passed her, I saw her start walking, not toward the shoulder or away from the road, but directly into the travel lane, in the same direction I was driving, like she meant to follow the truck on foot along the interstate. I called it in on the location, mile marker 49 northbound. Well, westbound technically on 40. And another trucker responded a few minutes later saying he hadn't seen anyone when he passed through maybe 20 minutes behind me. I didn't think much of that discrepancy at the time. People move, especially if she'd stepped off toward the tree line. About 2 miles later, at mile marker 47, I saw brake lights ahead. There was a car pulled over on the shoulder. Hazards on. A sedan, older model. Maybe a Camry. I don't remember the color exactly. Something dark. As I got closer, I slowed down again, because now this looked like an actual breakdown. Hazards. A car properly pulled off. Nothing unusual about wanting to check if the driver was okay, especially with a pedestrian wandering around loose just 2 miles back. I pulled onto the shoulder ahead of the car, put my own hazards on, and got out. The night was cold enough that I could see my breath, and the sound of the river was audible from where I stood, a low, constant rush from down in the gorge. I walked back toward the car, and that's when I noticed the driver's side door was open, just slightly, maybe 6 inches, dome light off. No movement inside that I could see. I called out, something like, "Hey, you need help?" Nothing. No response, no movement. I got closer, close enough to see into the car through the open door gap, and the front seats were both empty. No one in the driver's seat. No one in the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition, and the car was still running, engine idling quietly, headlights off, but the hazards blinking their slow amber pulse against the guardrail. I remember standing there processing that. A running car, driver's door open, hazards on, nobody inside, on a mountain interstate at almost midnight, 2 miles from where I'd just seen a woman in a summer dress walking into the road. I checked the back seat. Empty. I looked toward the tree line on the shoulder side and toward the guardrail on the gorge side and saw nothing. No movement, no sound beyond the river and my truck's engine idling back where I'd left it. This is the part I still can't explain, and I want to be precise about it rather than dramatize it, because dramatizing it would make it easier to dismiss. As I stood near that open car door, I heard, from somewhere below the guardrail, down toward the river, a sound that I can only describe as breathing. Not wind, not water. A slow, deliberate inhale and exhale, close enough that it didn't sound distant, but I couldn't see anyone down there. And the drop toward the river at that point in the gorge is steep, 40 or 50 feet at least, rocky, not something a person could easily stand on. Or I did not go look. I want to be honest about that too. Some people, telling this story, would probably say they investigated, went to the guardrail, shone a light down. I didn't. I backed away from that car, got in my truck, and called it into dispatch and then 911, giving my location and describing the abandoned vehicle, still running, still idling, and I pulled back onto the highway and kept driving. I made my delivery in Asheville around 1:40 a.m., 10 minutes behind schedule, and I told the guys at the dock a shortened version of what happened, mostly the abandoned car part, leaving out the breathing because I wasn't sure how to say it without sounding like I was losing it. One of them, an older guy named Pete, who'd been driving that route for over 20 years, got quiet and said something I've thought about a lot since. He said, "Gorge does that sometimes. People leave stuff on the road out there. Best not to stop unless you got to." I asked that, whether he'd seen something similar, and he just shrugged and said it wasn't his story to tell, and changed the subject. I over the following days, half expecting to find something, a missing persons report, an accident, anything that would explain the empty running car or the woman in the dress. I found one small item, a brief mention in a Newport, Tennessee local paper about Tennessee Highway Patrol responding to a report of an abandoned vehicle on I-40 near the Coke County line, found running with no occupants, registered to a woman whose family reported she'd been missing for approximately 3 weeks prior. No further updates that I could find. No follow-up story. I don't know if that woman was ever found, alive or otherwise. I don't know if the woman I saw walking on the shoulder 2 miles back was connected to that car at all, though the timing and the proximity have never sat right with me. I kept driving that route for almost another year after that night because it was my job and I needed the income, but I changed how I drove it. I stopped pulling over for anything on that stretch of the gorge, unless it involved flashing law enforcement lights specifically. If I saw hazards on an unattended vehicle, I called it in and kept moving. I know that sounds cold, and there's a part of me that still feels guilty about it. The idea that somewhere in those choices, there might have been a person who genuinely needed help and didn't get it. But I also can't shake what I heard coming from below that guardrail, in a spot no person should have been able to stand, breathing slow and steady in the dark, like it had all the time in the world. I don't work that route anymore. I switched companies about a year later for reasons mostly unrelated to this. Better pay, different hours, but I won't pretend the gorge run didn't factor into wanting a change. I still think about mile marker 47 sometimes, usually when I'm driving somewhere else entirely, some unrelated stretch of highway at night, and a car passes with its hazards on for no clear reason. I think about that door open 6 inches, the engine still running, the seats empty, and the sound that had no source I could ever find, and I find myself, without really deciding to, pressing a little harder on the gas. That's it for tonight's stories. If there's one thing that connects all 3 of these, the rest stop outside San Jon, the green Jeep on Highway 89, mile marker 47 in the Pigeon River Gorge, it's that none of them end with an answer. No arrest, no explanation. Just people who got back in their cars, kept driving, and never quite stopped looking in the mirror. If you drive long stretches of highway at night for work, or even just for a road trip, I genuinely like to hear about it. Drop your own story in the comments. Where it happened, what road, what time of night. I read all of them, and some of the scariest stories on this channel have come straight from you. If you want more true stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because I post new ones every day. And if this video kept you company on a late drive tonight, get home safe. I'll see you in the next one.